The small town of Willowbrook was the kind of place where everyone knew each other. Neighbors exchanged warm smiles, shopkeepers greeted customers by name, and life moved at a slow, predictable pace. But on this chilly autumn morning, the usual calm had been replaced by an air of sadness. The townsfolk gathered quietly outside St. Mary's Church, their faces etched with grief as they prepared to say goodbye to Eleanor Grayson, one of Willowbrook's most cherished residents. Eleanor had lived in the town for over 40 years. She was known for her gentle nature, her love of gardening, and her habit of baking cookies for anyone who needed cheering up. Her husband, Thomas, had passed away 5 years earlier, leaving her alone in their cozy little cottage on Maple Street. Despite her loss, Eleanor continued to brighten the lives of those around her. Whether it was volunteering at the local library, knitting scarves for charity, or simply offering a listening ear, she had become a pillar of strength for many. But now, Eleanor was gone too. Her sudden death had shocked the entire community. No one could quite believe that someone so full of life had left them so unexpectedly. Rumors swirled about what might have happened. Some said she had fallen ill overnight. Others whispered about something more sinister. The official cause of death was listed as natural causes, but there were lingering questions no one dared to ask aloud. Inside the church, Father Michael O'Connell stood near the altar, adjusting his robes and preparing himself mentally for the service ahead. He had known Eleanor well. She often attended Sunday Mass and sometimes stayed afterward to chat about her garden or share stories about Thomas. To him, she wasn't just a parishioner, she was a friend. Conducting her funeral felt different from all the others he had presided over. There was a heaviness in the air, an unspoken tension that made it hard to focus. As the mourners filed into the pews, Father Michael glanced around the room. Every seat was filled. Even people who rarely stepped foot inside the church had come to pay their respects. Among them were Eleanor's closest friends, Margaret, who ran the bakery downtown, Robert, the retired schoolteacher, and Sarah, a young mother whose children adored Eleanor's homemade lemonade. Each face bore a mixture of sorrow and disbelief, as if they were still trying to process the loss. The casket sat at the front of the church, adorned with white lilies, the flower Eleanor loved most. It was open, allowing visitors to see her one last time. As Father Michael began the service, he encouraged everyone to approach the casket and say their goodbyes. One by one they did, some pausing only briefly while others lingered, tears streaming down their cheeks. A few even reached out to touch her hand, as if hoping to feel some trace of warmth. Father Michael watched silently as the line of mourners slowly dwindled. He had seen countless funerals in his time, yet something about this one felt off. Maybe it was the way Eleanor looked. She seemed almost too peaceful, her expression serene and untouched by worry. Or perhaps it was the atmosphere itself. The quiet murmurs, the shuffling feet, the occasional sniffle, all blending together to create a sense of unease that he couldn't shake. When the last person returned to their seat, Father Michael took a deep breath and walked toward the casket. This was part of his duty, to offer a final blessing before the lid was closed forever. As he stood beside Eleanor, he bowed his head and began reciting the traditional prayers, but halfway through, his gaze drifted downward, drawn inexplicably, to her hands folded neatly across her chest. At first glance, everything appeared normal. Her fingers were slender and delicate, her nails painted a soft pink, the same shade she always wore. Yet something caught his eye, a faint shimmer, barely noticeable in the dim light of the church candles. Father Michael frowned, leaning closer, to get a better look. His heart skipped a beat when he realized what it was. There, on Eleanor's left ring finger, was a mark. Not a scratch or a bruise, but something deliberate. Tiny lines carved into her skin, forming shapes that looked almost like letters. His pulse quickened as he squinted, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. The longer he stared, the clearer the image became. And then it hit him, a single word, written in precise minuscule script: help. For a moment, Father Michael froze, his mind racing. Was this real? Had he imagined it? He blinked several times, convinced his eyes were playing tricks on him. But the word remained stark and undeniable against her pale skin. A cold knot formed in his stomach as realization dawned. This wasn't a coincidence. Someone, or something, had left this message intentionally. Despite his growing unease, Father Michael forced himself to remain composed. He straightened up, glancing around the church to ensure no one else had noticed his reaction. The congregation was focused on the hymns being sung softly in the background, unaware of the storm brewing inside their priest's mind. Carefully, he finished the blessing and signaled for the pallbearers to close the casket. As the lid clicked shut, Father Michael exhaled deeply, his thoughts swirling with questions. What did this mean? Who could have done such a thing? And why? Would someone carve a plea for help onto Eleanor's body after she was already gone? These mysteries gnawed at him, refusing to let go. Whatever the truth was, one thing was certain. Eleanor's death was far from ordinary. Something dark and unsettling lay beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered. After the funeral service ended, Father Michael O'Connell found himself unable to shake the image of that single word etched into Eleanor's skin. It haunted him, burned into his mind like a brand. As the mourners filed out of the church, exchanging quiet condolences and heading toward their cars, he lingered behind, staring at the closed casket. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his collar, trying to steady himself. He had seen many strange things in his years as a priest, but nothing quite like this. The church grew quieter as the last few people left, their footsteps echoing faintly before fading entirely. The heavy wooden doors creaked shut, leaving Father Michael alone with his thoughts and the weight of what he had just discovered. For a moment he considered dismissing it as an illusion, a trick of the light or perhaps exhaustion playing games with his eyes. But deep down, he knew better. That mark on Eleanor's finger was real, and it wasn't there by accident. Determined to get a closer look without alarming anyone, Father Michael decided to act quickly. He retrieved his phone from the pocket of his robe and turned on the flashlight feature. Carefully, he approached the casket again, his heart pounding in his chest. With trembling fingers, he opened the lid just enough to reveal Eleanor's hands once more. The soft glow of the phone's light illuminated her pale skin, and there it was, the same tiny inscription, clear as day. Help. Father Michael felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't some random scratch or bruise. The letters were precise, almost artistic in their execution. Someone had taken great care to carve them into her skin. But who? And why would they leave such a cryptic message after her death? The implications sent a wave of dread coursing through him. If Eleanor had truly needed help, why hadn't she reached out while she was still alive? Or worse, had she been prevented from doing so? Unable to tear his gaze away, Father Michael snapped a quick photo of the marking with his phone. He didn't want to risk forgetting any details later, especially if something happened to the evidence. Once the picture was safely stored, he closed the casket again and stepped back, exhaling sharply. His mind raced with possibilities, each one darker than the last. Was this connected to her sudden death? Had someone silenced her before she could speak up about whatever trouble she might have been in? That evening, Father Michael sat alone, in his small study, the room dimly lit by a single desk lamp. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of old floorboards settling. On the table in front of him lay his Bible, open to a random page, though he hadn't read a single word since sitting down. Instead, his attention was fixed entirely on the photograph he had taken earlier. He zoomed in on the image, examining every curve and line of the inscription. The word help stared back at him, unyielding and accusatory. As he studied the photo, another thought occurred to him. How had no one else noticed this? Dozens of people had walked past the casket during the service, paying their respects. Surely someone must have seen the marking. It wasn't invisible after all, yet not a single person had mentioned it. Could they have overlooked it, distracted by grief? Or was there something more sinister at play? Perhaps whoever had done this had counted on the fact that most people wouldn't look too closely. Father Michael leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. He was no detective, but he couldn't ignore the responsibility he felt to uncover the truth. Eleanor had been a kind and gentle soul, someone who deserved justice, not just prayers and flowers. If there was even a chance that her death wasn't as straightforward as it seemed, he owed it to her to find out why. His thoughts drifted back to the days leading up to Eleanor's passing. She had seemed fine, or at least as fine as someone living alone could be. He remembered seeing her at Mass just 2 weeks prior, chatting animatedly with Margaret from the bakery about plans for the upcoming fall festival. There had been no signs of distress, no hints that anything was amiss. But now looking back, he wondered if he had missed something. Had she dropped subtle clues that he hadn't picked up on? Or had she been too afraid to say anything? The more he thought about it, the more certain he became that this wasn't just a bizarre coincidence. Something, or someone, had driven Eleanor to desperation. The question was what? And how far did this mystery go? Father Michael spent hours poring over the photo, searching for answers that weren't there. Eventually, exhaustion overtook him, and he set the phone aside, leaning forward to rest his elbows on the desk. His mind buzzed with unanswered questions, but one thing was clear: he couldn't let this rest. Whatever secrets Eleanor had carried with her to the grave, they demanded to be uncovered. Her plea for help wasn't just a message, it was a call to action. And Father Michael intended to answer it. The next morning he woke early, his resolve stronger than ever. Before heading to the church, he made a decision. He would retrace Eleanor's final days, talk to those closest to her, and see if anyone else had noticed anything unusual. If the truth was hidden somewhere in Willowbrook, he was determined to find it. After all, Eleanor had always been there for others when they needed her. Now, it was his turn to return the favor, even if it meant confronting shadows he wasn't sure he was ready to face. The next morning, Father Michael rose before sunrise, his mind still heavy with thoughts of Eleanor and the mysterious word etched into her skin. He knew he couldn't simply sit back and let this mystery go unanswered. Something about that plea for help gnawed at him, urging him to dig deeper. As he prepared for the day, he made a mental list of people to speak with, those who had been closest to Eleanor in her final days. If anyone had noticed something unusual, they might hold the key to unraveling this unsettling puzzle. His first stop was Margaret's Bakery, a cozy little shop nestled on the corner of Main Street. The smell of freshly baked bread wafted through the air as Father Michael stepped inside, greeted by the familiar jingle of the doorbell. Margaret stood behind the counter, kneading dough with practiced hands. Her face lit up when she saw him, though her smile faltered slightly as she remembered the somber occasion that had brought them together just the day before. "Father Michael," she said softly, wiping her hands on her apron. "What brings you here so early?" "I need to talk to you about Eleanor," he replied, his tone gentle but serious. "Something strange has come to my attention, and I think you might be able to help." Margaret's brow furrowed, and she gestured for him to take a seat at one of the small wooden tables near the window. Once they were settled, Father Michael explained what he had discovered, the tiny inscription on Eleanor's finger and his growing suspicion that her death might not have been as straightforward as it seemed. Margaret listened intently, her eyes widening with shock. "I had no idea," she whispered, shaking her head. "I didn't see anything like that yesterday. Are you sure it wasn't just, I don't know, an old scar or something?" "I'm certain," Father Michael said firmly. "It was deliberate. Someone carved that word into her skin, and if we're going to understand why, we need to look closer at her life before she passed." Margaret nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "Well, Eleanor did seem a bit distracted lately. Not herself, you know. She mentioned feeling tired all the time, but I figured it was just because she was getting older. Still, there were moments when she acted almost secretive, like she wanted to tell me something but changed her mind at the last second." This revelation sent a shiver down Father Michael's spine. Secretive behavior wasn't typical of Eleanor, who had always been open and trusting. Could she have been hiding something important? Or worse, could someone have been pressuring her to keep quiet? After thanking Margaret for her insight, Father Michael decided to visit Robert, the retired schoolteacher who had known Eleanor since their college days. Robert lived in a modest house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by towering oak trees that cast long shadows over his yard. When Father Michael arrived, he found Robert sitting on the porch sipping coffee and reading a book. "Father Michael," Robert greeted him warmly, setting aside his mug. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "It's about Eleanor," Father Michael began, taking a seat beside him. "I've uncovered something troubling, and I think you might be able to shed some light on it." Robert's cheerful demeanor faded as Father Michael recounted the details of the inscription and Margaret's observations. Like Margaret, Robert was visibly shaken by the news. "That doesn't sound like Eleanor at all," he murmured, rubbing his temples. "She was always so straightforward, so honest. If something was bothering her, she'd usually say it outright. But not this time?" Father Michael pressed gently. Robert hesitated, then sighed. "Now that you mention it, she did seem different these past few months. She started canceling our weekly chess games out of the blue, saying she was busy with projects or errands. At first I thought nothing of it, but looking back, it does feel odd, especially since she never really explained what those projects were." A pattern was beginning to emerge. Eleanor had been withdrawing from her usual routines, acting more reserved than ever before. But what had caused such a drastic change? Father Michael thanked Robert for his time and promised to keep him updated if he learned anything new. With each conversation, the pieces of the puzzle were slowly coming together, though the full picture remained frustratingly elusive. Later that afternoon, Father Michael paid a visit to Sarah, the young mother whose children adored Eleanor's lemonade. Sarah welcomed him into her home, balancing a squirming toddler on her hip while another child played quietly in the corner. Despite the chaos, she listened attentively as Father Michael shared his concerns. "I remember something," Sarah said suddenly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "About a month ago, Eleanor came over to drop off cookies for the kids. While she was here, she mentioned meeting some new friends, a group of people interested in history and folklore. She seemed excited about it at first, but later, when I asked how it was going, she brushed it off like it wasn't a big deal anymore. Do you think that could be connected?" Father Michael's pulse quickened. A group focused on history and folklore? It sounded harmless enough, but given everything else he had learned, it was worth investigating further. "Do you know anything else about this group?" he asked. "Did she mention names or where they met?" Sarah shook her head apologetically. "Sorry, Father. That's all I remember. But if it helps, she did say they sometimes gathered at that old estate on the edge of town, the one everyone says is haunted." The mention of the estate gave Father Michael pause. The sprawling property had been abandoned for decades, its crumbling mansion a favorite subject of local legends. If Eleanor had been spending time there with strangers, it raised even more red flags. Determined to follow every lead, he resolved to visit the estate himself as soon as possible. By the end of the day, Father Michael's head was spinning with fragments of information. Each person he spoke to added another layer to the mystery, painting a picture of a woman who had been struggling silently in her final days. Yet despite the growing web of clues, one question loomed larger than ever. Who had marked Eleanor's finger with that desperate plea for help, and why? As night fell, Father Michael returned to his study, his mind racing. He pulled out the photo of the inscription once more, staring at it until his eyes blurred. Whatever secrets Eleanor had carried, they weren't buried with her. They were waiting to be uncovered, hidden somewhere in the shadows of Willowbrook. And Father Michael was determined to bring them into the light, no matter how dark the truth might turn out to be. The next morning, Father Michael set out early, his mind heavy with the fragments of information he had gathered. The old estate on the edge of town loomed large in his thoughts, a place steeped in mystery and whispered legends. It was a long shot, but it was the only lead he had. If Eleanor had been involved with a secretive group that met there, perhaps the answers he sought were hidden within its crumbling walls. As he drove along the winding road leading to the estate, the scenery shifted dramatically. The cheerful charm of Willowbrook gave way to dense woods, their skeletal branches reaching out like ghostly fingers. The air grew colder, and an eerie stillness settled over the landscape. When the mansion finally came into view, Father Michael felt a chill run down his spine. The building was a relic of another time, its once grand architecture now overtaken by decay. Windows were shattered, vines snaked up the stone walls, and the iron gate hung crookedly on rusted hinges. He parked his car near the entrance and stepped out cautiously, the crunch of gravel beneath his feet breaking the silence. Pushing open the creaking gate, he entered the property, his senses on high alert. The closer he got to the mansion, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. Shadows seemed to stretch unnaturally long, and the faint sound of wind whistling through broken windows sent shivers down his spine. Inside, the mansion was even more foreboding. Dust blanketed every surface, and the musty smell of neglect filled the air. Sunlight filtered weakly through cracks in the boarded-up windows, casting dim patterns on the floor. Father Michael moved carefully, his footsteps echoing softly as he explored room after room. Most were empty, save for scattered debris and remnants of furniture left behind decades ago. But one particular room caught his attention, a study tucked away at the far end of the house. The study was different from the rest of the mansion. Though dusty and disheveled, it showed signs of recent activity. Papers were strewn across a large oak desk, some bearing strange symbols and cryptic notes scrawled in ink. A candlestick lay on its side, partially melted wax pooling around its base. Someone had been here recently, and they hadn't left in a hurry. Father Michael approached the desk, his heart pounding. As he sifted through the papers, he began to piece together what might have happened. Many of the documents referenced something called the Order of the Veil, a name Sarah had mentioned during their conversation. There were references to rituals, coded messages, and warnings about secrecy. One document stood out, a handwritten journal entry, presumably written by Eleanor herself. With trembling hands, Father Michael picked up the journal and began to read. The entries revealed a side of Eleanor he had never known. She had joined the Order of the Veil out of curiosity, drawn by promises of uncovering ancient knowledge and protecting sacred traditions. At first she had been excited, attending meetings and participating in discussions. But as time went on, her tone shifted. She wrote about feeling uneasy, sensing that the group's intentions weren't as noble as they claimed. They spoke of initiations and tests of loyalty, which made her increasingly anxious. In one chilling passage, Eleanor confessed her fears. "I think I've made a terrible mistake. These people, they aren't who they say they are. They talk about preserving history, but there's something darker beneath the surface. I tried to leave, but they won't let me go. They say I know too much now. What if they hurt me? Or worse?" The words hit Father Michael like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just paranoia. It was a cry for help, written weeks before her death. He flipped through the remaining pages, finding sketches of symbols similar to the ones etched onto her finger. Another entry described a ritual involving markings carved into the skin of those deemed unworthy or traitorous. Suddenly, the meaning of the word help became horrifyingly clear. It wasn't just a plea, it was a warning meant to expose the truth. But the journal didn't stop there. In her final entry, dated just days before her passing, Eleanor revealed her plan to escape. "I can't stay here any longer," she wrote. "If anything happens to me, look for the box under the floorboards in my attic. Everything you need to know is inside." Her desperation leapt off the page, raw and unfiltered. Father Michael closed the journal, his mind racing. Whatever had happened to Eleanor, it was tied to this group, and they wouldn't hesitate to silence anyone else who threatened to expose them. Determined to find the box Eleanor had mentioned, Father Michael left the mansion and headed straight for her cottage. The small house felt eerily quiet without her presence, each creak of the floorboards amplifying the emptiness. He climbed the narrow staircase to the attic, where sunlight streamed through cracks in the roof. The space was cluttered, with boxes, old furniture, and forgotten mementos. But Father Michael focused on the center of the room. Kneeling down, he ran his fingers over the wooden planks until he found what he was looking for, a loose section of flooring. Prying it up with a crowbar he found nearby, he uncovered a small metal box buried beneath. Its edges were worn, but it was intact. Opening it carefully, he discovered a treasure trove of evidence: photographs of masked figures gathered in the mansion, handwritten notes detailing the group's activities, and letters addressed to Eleanor from someone named Victor Langley. Each item added another layer to the sinister web surrounding the Order of the Veil. Among the contents was a letter that chilled Father Michael to the bone. Written in elegant script, it read, "Eleanor, your attempts to leave us cannot be tolerated. You swore an oath, and oaths must be honored. Consider this your final warning. Do not make us regret our decision to trust you." It was signed simply, V. It all clicked into place. The Order of the Veil wasn't just a harmless gathering of history enthusiasts. It was a dangerous organization willing to go to extreme lengths to protect its secrets. And Victor Langley, whoever he was, appeared to be at the center of it all. Clutching the box tightly, Father Michael knew he couldn't face this alone. The stakes were too high, and the danger too real. He needed to gather more allies, people he could trust to help him bring justice for Eleanor. But as he descended the stairs of the cottage, one thought lingered in his mind. The Order already knew he was asking questions. If they were watching, how long did he have before they came? For him too? Father Michael knew he was running out of time. The evidence he had uncovered in Eleanor's attic painted a grim picture, and the implications weighed heavily on his shoulders. The Order of the Veil wasn't just some eccentric club. It was a secretive, dangerous organization with members willing to silence anyone who posed a threat to their secrecy. And now he realized he might have become a target himself. Every creak of the floorboards in Eleanor's empty cottage felt like a warning. Someone could be watching him, waiting for the right moment to strike. Determined not to let fear paralyze him, Father Michael decided to act quickly. His next move was clear. He needed to confront Victor Langley, the man whose name appeared repeatedly in Eleanor's journal and letters. If anyone held the answers about what had happened to her, it was him. But approaching Victor wasn't going to be easy. He wasn't just any ordinary citizen. He was a respected historian in Willowbrook, known for his lectures on local folklore and his charming demeanor at community events. To most people, Victor seemed harmless, even admirable. Yet beneath that polished exterior lay someone capable of manipulation, intimidation, and worse. That evening, as twilight settled over Willowbrook, Father Michael drove to the outskirts of town, where Victor lived in a sprawling Victorian-style house surrounded by towering hedges. The property exuded an air of wealth and exclusivity, but tonight it felt more like a fortress guarding its secrets. Parking his car a short distance away, Father Michael approached cautiously, keeping to the shadows cast by the trees lining the road. He didn't want to announce his presence too soon. Reaching the edge of the property, he spotted Victor standing near the garden, gazing up at the stars. Dressed in a tailored coat, he looked every bit the distinguished academic, a stark contrast to the sinister figure described in Eleanor's writings. Father Michael took a deep breath, steeling himself for the confrontation ahead. Stepping forward, he called out, "Victor Langley?" Victor turned sharply, startled by the unexpected voice. When he saw Father Michael, his expression shifted, from surprise to polite curiosity. "Father O'Connell," he said smoothly, his tone warm but guarded. "What brings you here so late?" "I think you already know why I'm here," Father Michael replied, his voice steady despite the knot of anxiety tightening in his chest. "We need to talk about Eleanor Grayson." For a brief moment, Victor's calm facade faltered, a flicker of unease crossing his face. But just as quickly he recovered, offering a tight smile. "Ah, yes, poor Eleanor. Such a tragic loss. She was a remarkable woman. How can I assist you?" "Don't play games with me," Father Michael said firmly, stepping closer. "I know about the Order of the Veil, I've seen the letters you sent her, the warnings she received. You tried to scare her into staying silent, didn't you? What did you do when she refused? Victor's eyes narrowed slightly, his composure slipping further. I don't know what nonsense you're referring to, he said coolly, though there was a hint of irritation in his voice. Eleanor was a dear friend and I mourn her passing deeply. If you're implying something untoward, I assure you, you're mistaken. Father Michael wasn't convinced. Pulling out one of the letters from the box he had found in Eleanor's attic, he held it up for Victor to see. Then explain this, he demanded. This is your handwriting, isn't it? Your signature. V. You threatened her, Victor. Why else would she write those desperate entries in her journal? Victor's jaw tightened and for a moment he said nothing. Then with a sigh he gestured toward a bench nearby. Very well, he said, his tone shifting to something darker, colder. Let's sit down and have a proper conversation. Reluctantly, Father Michael followed him to the bench, his instincts screaming at him to stay alert. As they sat under the dim light of the moon, Victor leaned back, adopting an almost casual posture. You're meddling in matters far beyond your understanding, Father, he began, his voice low and deliberate. The Order of the Veil exists to protect ancient knowledge, traditions that stretch back centuries. We are stewards of history, not criminals. That doesn't justify threatening Eleanor or marking her body after her death, Father Michael shot back, his anger rising. She begged for help, Victor. She was terrified of you and your so-called order. Did you kill her? Victor chuckled softly, a sound devoid of humor. No, we didn't kill her, he admitted, though his words carried little reassurance. Her death was unfortunate, but it wasn't murder. It was an accident during an initiation ritual, one she insisted on participating in despite our warnings. She panicked, lost control, and he trailed off, spreading his hands as if to suggest the rest was inevitable. Father Michael stared at him, horrified. An accident? You call terrorizing someone into submission and then letting them die during some twisted ceremony an accident? His voice rose, trembling with outrage. She trusted you and you betrayed her. Victor's expression hardened, any pretense of charm vanishing. You misunderstand, Father, he said coldly. Eleanor chose to involve herself in things she couldn't comprehend. Once she joined us, leaving wasn't an option. Loyalty is sacred within the Order. Those who break their vows face consequences. So you marked her finger as a warning? Father Michael pressed, his fists clenched at his sides. As a way to send a message to others who might try to leave? Victor didn't answer directly, but the smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth was answer enough. Father Michael felt sickened by the sheer arrogance of the man sitting beside him. This wasn't justice, it was cruelty masked as tradition. Standing abruptly, Father Michael glared down at Victor. I won't let you get away with this, he declared. I'll make sure everyone knows the truth about the Order of the Veil and the danger you pose. Victor rose to his feet as well, his demeanor icy. Be careful, Father, he warned, his voice laced with menace. People who meddle in affairs they don't understand often find themselves regretting it. Consider this your only warning. With that, Victor turned and walked back toward his house, leaving Father Michael alone in the shadowy garden. The encounter left him shaken, but more determined than ever. He realized now that exposing the Order of the Veil wouldn't be easy. They were powerful, cunning, and unafraid to intimidate anyone who stood in their way. But giving up wasn't an option. Eleanor had risked everything to escape their grasp, and her plea for help deserved to be answered. Driving back to his home, Father Michael began formulating a plan. He couldn't take on the Order alone, but he also couldn't trust just anyone. First, he needed to secure the evidence he had gathered, the journal, the letters, the photographs, and ensure it couldn't be destroyed. Then, he would reach out to individuals he trusted implicitly, Margaret, Robert, and Sarah, who had already shown concern for Eleanor's fate. Together, they could piece together a case strong enough to bring to the authorities. But even as he worked late into the night organizing documents and making notes, Father Michael couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Shadows seemed darker, noises sharper. Every movement outside his window potentially a sign of danger. The Order of the Veil wasn't going to let him expose them without a fight, and yet, despite the risks, he pressed on, driven by a sense of duty to Eleanor and all those who might suffer if the truth remained buried. By dawn, Father Michael had made his decision. No matter how dangerous the path ahead, he would see it through. For Eleanor, for justice, and for the innocent lives still at risk, he vowed to shine a light on the darkness hiding in plain sight. The days that followed were a blur of tension and determination for Father Michael. He knew the stakes were higher than ever, and with each passing hour, he felt the weight of what lay ahead pressing down on him. The evidence he had gathered from Eleanor's attic was damning. Photographs of masked figures, cryptic notes detailing rituals, and letters signed by Victor Langley. But it wasn't enough to confront the Order of the Veil directly. To dismantle such a secretive and dangerous group, he needed allies who could help him navigate the storm. His first step was reaching out to Margaret, Robert, and Sarah, the people closest to Eleanor who had already shown concern about her sudden change in behavior. They met at Margaret's bakery late one evening after closing time, the scent of fresh bread lingering in the air. Father Michael laid everything on the table, the journal entries, the markings on Eleanor's finger, the chilling encounter with Victor Langley. At first, they listened in stunned silence, their faces pale as the gravity of the situation sank in. This can't be real," Sarah whispered, clutching her hands tightly together. "Victor is supposed to be one of the good guys. Everyone trusts him." "That's how they operate," Father Michael said grimly. "They hide behind respectability, using their positions to manipulate and control. But we have proof now, proof that could bring them down if we handle it carefully." Robert nodded slowly, his brow furrowed in thought. "What do you need us to do?" he asked. "If there's even a chance we can stop them from hurting anyone else, I'm in." Margaret agreed, though her voice trembled slightly. "Eleanor was like family to me," she said. "I owe it to her to make sure her death wasn't in vain." With their support secured, Father Michael outlined a plan. First, they would gather more concrete evidence, records, photographs, anything that could link the Order of the Veil to illegal activities or threats against Eleanor. Margaret volunteered to discreetly inquire among her customers, many of whom were longtime residents of Willowbrook, to see if anyone else had heard rumors about the group. Robert, with his meticulous attention to detail, offered to comb through old newspaper archives and public records for any mention of the mansion or Victor Langley's activities. Sarah, whose children often played near the estate, promised to keep an eye out for unusual comings and goings. Meanwhile, Father Michael focused on compiling all the information into a dossier he could present to law enforcement. He knew going to the police wouldn't be easy. They might dismiss his claims as paranoia or conspiracy theories without solid evidence. But armed with the journal, the letters, and eyewitness accounts, he hoped to build a case strong enough to demand action. As the days turned into weeks, the group worked tirelessly, piecing together fragments of the puzzle. Each new discovery brought them closer to exposing the Order of the Veil, but it also heightened the danger. Strange things began happening around town. Margaret reported finding her bakery vandalized overnight, windows smashed and shelves overturned. Robert received anonymous phone calls late at night, the caller remaining silent except for faint breathing. Even Sarah noticed unfamiliar cars parked outside her house, their occupants watching silently from inside. Father Michael tried to reassure them, reminding them why they were doing this, for Eleanor, for justice, and for the safety of their community. Still, the fear was palpable. Every shadow seemed darker, every sound louder. It was as if the Order of the Veil was tightening its grip, warning them to back off before it was too late. But Father Michael refused to yield. Late one night, after poring over documents in his study, he finally completed the dossier. It was a comprehensive file detailing everything they had uncovered. Eleanor's journal entries, the threatening letters from Victor, photographic evidence of the group's gatherings, and testimonies from townsfolk who had witnessed suspicious behavior. He included a timeline of events leading up to Eleanor's death, leaving no room for doubt about the connection between the Order of the Veil and her tragic fate. The next morning, Father Michael drove to the county sheriff's office, the dossier clutched tightly in his hands. He requested a private meeting with Sheriff Daniels, a man known for his integrity and dedication to justice. Though initially skeptical, the sheriff listened intently as Father Michael presented the evidence. By the end of the conversation, Daniels's expression had shifted from disbelief to grave concern. "This is serious," the sheriff said, flipping through the pages of the dossier. "If even half of this is true, we're dealing with something far bigger than I imagined. I'll look into it personally." True to his word, Sheriff Daniels wasted no time. Within days, a team of investigators descended upon the old mansion, searching for physical evidence of the Order of the Veil's activities. Hidden rooms were uncovered, containing ritualistic artifacts and documents confirming the group's existence. Victor Langley's home was raided, revealing incriminating files and correspondence linking him to the organization. When confronted, Victor attempted to deny involvement, but the overwhelming evidence left him with nowhere to hide. As arrests were made and news of the Order of the Veil spread throughout Willowbrook, the town erupted in shock and disbelief. Many struggled to reconcile the sinister revelations with the seemingly respectable individuals implicated in the scandal. Yet amidst the chaos, there was a sense of relief, a collective exhale from a community that had unknowingly lived under the shadow of danger for years. For Father Michael, the victory was bittersweet. While justice had been served, it came at a cost. Eleanor was gone, her life cut short by greed and cruelty. But her plea for help had not been in vain. Through her courage and the determination of those who loved her, her voice had been heard, loud and clear. In the months that followed, life in Willowbrook slowly returned to normal. The mansion was boarded up permanently, its secrets locked away once more. Victor Langley and several other members of the Order of the Veil faced trial, their crimes exposed for all to see. Father Michael continued his work at St. Mary's Church, but he carried Eleanor's memory with him always, a reminder of the importance of standing up for truth and justice, even when it felt impossible. One crisp autumn morning, Father Michael visited Eleanor's grave, placing a bouquet of white lilies atop the headstone. As he stood there, he whispered softly, "You're at peace now, Eleanor. Your message was heard, and your fight is over. Rest well." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it a quiet stillness. For the first time in months, Father Michael felt a sense of closure. Though the scars of what had happened would never fully fade, the darkness had been lifted, and in its place, hope bloomed anew. Not just for Willowbrook, but for everyone who dared to believe that even the smallest cry for help could spark change.